abandoned by her pack, a silver wolf's loyalty in the cold. The wind cut through the forest like a blade, carrying with it the bitter scent of snow and pine. Moonlight fell in silver streaks across the frozen ground, glinting on the sharp edges of ice that clung to every branch. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled, a sound that echoed through the skeletal trees and made the silence heavier. Celine crouched on the ridge above the valley, her silver fur blending with the snow, hiding her from the eyes of the world. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, but her heart felt anything but calm. Rasp. Ah! He had walked alone for weeks, fleeing the pack that had raised her, yet now cast her out. Accused of betrayal she had never committed, she had become a shadow, a hunted creature with nothing but the frost to keep her company. The forest had always been her home, but now it felt like a cage. Every crackle of ice beneath her paws, every gust of wind that whipped against her face, reminded her of her solitude. She remembered the nights she had been abandoned. The leaders of her pack, those who had once called her sister, had turned their backs on her in the hollow light of the moon, their eyes full of suspicion and cold judgment. "I trusted you," the Alpha had said, and the words had cut deeper than any claw. "And you betrayed us all," Celine had tried to explain, tried to plead. But no one had listened. Her heart had shattered quietly, like ice breaking beneath a slow stream. Now she ran through the forests, through the mountains and frozen rivers, searching for nothing, carrying only the pain of rejection and the instinct to survive. Her ears twitched. A faint sound of movement reached her, soft against the wind, but she crouched lower, her golden eyes narrowing. Something was coming. Not a wolf. This presence was heavier, darker, colder. Celine's claws dug into the snow as she prepared to defend herself, every muscle tense. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and regal, his form cloaked in black against the pale silver of the night. He moved with quiet grace, each step deliberate, as if he belonged to the shadows themselves. His eyes, a piercing shade of gray, locked onto her. And in that moment, the forest seemed to still. "Do not run," he said, his voice smooth, controlled, carrying a weight that made the air itself feel heavier. Celine's muscles tensed, but she did not flee. There was something in him, something dangerous and commanding that made her instinct to fight falter. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady even as her heart hammered in her chest. "I am Kyle," he said, heir to the Northern Throne. His gaze swept over her, noting every movement, every twitch of her ears, every flicker of her tail. "And you, Silver Wolf, are far from safety." She had been alone for so long that anyone approaching her was a threat, and yet there was something in the way he spoke that demanded attention, even caution. "I do not need protection," she said, lifting her chin. "I can survive on my own." Kyle's lips curved into something like a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "Alone, you may survive," he said quietly. "But alone, you may not live long." Before she could reply, a roar tore through the valley below. Snow erupted into the air as a monstrous predator, larger than any wolf Celine had ever seen, emerged from the darkness. Its eyes glowed amber in the moonlight, and its jaws opened in a silent snarl. Celine's heart leapt. She could fight, yes, but alone? Perhaps not. She looked to Kale, and for the first time she saw the strength in his presence. He did not hesitate. With a sudden motion, he drew a sword that gleamed with a strange, cold light. The predator froze, as if recognizing the power in the man who faced it. Kyle's voice was low, commanding. "Begone," he said. The wind seemed to answer him, whipping against the creature's face. For a moment, the beast faltered, then vanished into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Selene blinked, her chest heaving. But she had survived attacks like this before, but never had anyone appeared so suddenly, so efficiently. She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she studied him, trying to understand this strange man who moved like the night itself. Kale sheathed his sword and turned to her. "You are strong," he said. "But strength alone is not enough." "I do not belong to anyone," Selene said sharply. She would not allow herself to be bound again, not after the pain of betrayal. "I answer to no one." Kale's gray eyes did not waver. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but even the strongest must choose alliances, or the cold will take them."
The wind shifted, and with it came a deeper sense of foreboding.
Selene's instincts screamed at her to leave, yet the same instincts urged her to listen. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing against her, as if fate itself had arranged this meeting. "I will not go with you," she said finally, her voice firm. "And I will not beg for protection." Kael's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Bess, I do not ask you to beg," he said. "But when the frost rises and the night deepens, you may find that your choice will be made for you."
Before Selene could respond, the ground beneath her cracked.
Ice shifted violently, and a deep, unnatural chill swept through the forest. She tried to leap to safety, but the frost spread too quickly, wrapping around her paws, climbing her legs like silver chains. "Selene!" Kale shouted, rushing forward, his cloak whipping in the wind. He reached for her, but the frost spread faster than his stride, freezing the space between them. She struggled, her claws scrabbling against the ice, her heart hammering in panic. "You cannot fight it alone!" Kale yelled, his voice slicing through the roar of the storm. He extended both hands, silver light shimmering from his sword, but the ice held fast. Selene's vision blurred, frost biting her fur and skin. For a moment, she felt the suffocating fear of being trapped, abandoned once again. Her mind flashed with memories of her pack, turning away from her, their eyes full of cold accusation. She could almost hear their voices whispering through the wind. "You are alone. You have always been alone." And yet, beneath that despair, a spark of something new appeared, a flicker of hope, fragile but persistent. Kale's hand was so close now, his presence so near. For the first time in weeks, she felt the possibility of trust. Then the frost surged again, stronger, faster, and Selene cried out as the ice began to swallow her entirely. Her ears flattened, her claws digging desperately into the frozen ground, but the cold was merciless. Kale's gray eyes burned with urgency and something else, something she could not name. "Hold on!" he shouted, voice almost breaking the icy wind that tore through the forest. Desperate. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The snow swirled around them, the moonlight shining like silver fire. Selene's golden eyes met Kale's gray ones, and in that instant, something passed between them. Not words, not promises, just the recognition of two beings who had been shaped by cold and betrayal, standing on the edge of a choice neither had expected to face. And then, just as suddenly, the ice seemed to pulse, expanding outward, wrapping her in its cruel embrace. Kale's hand reached, fingers trembling, and for a moment Selene felt the warmth of his touch brush against hers. But the frost still held her, sharp and unyielding, freezing her in place. The wind howled, the moon disappeared behind a cloud, and Selene felt herself slipping into darkness, caught between fear and hope. She did not know if she would survive the night, But she did know one thing. She was not truly alone. And that thought, fragile as it was, carried her into the frozen shadows. The frost receded slowly, curling like smoke in the air as Kale dragged Celine inside the fortress. Her fur, damp and frozen, glimmered under the torchlight like silver threads. The moment she stepped over the threshold, the warmth of the stone walls hit her, and for the first time in weeks, Celine felt the ache of exhaustion soften. Kale laid her gently on a pile of furs, his hands surprisingly careful despite their strength. "You are foolish," he said, voice low, but not unkind. "The forest does not forgive weakness. Breaths, and neither do people," she muttered. Her golden eyes studied him as he moved away, returning to the shadows where he seemed to belong. The prince's gray eyes followed her, observing her silently, as though measuring every heartbeat. She did not trust him, not yet. She could not, and yet something about him made her pause. He had saved her life, and not in a fleeting, careless way, but with purpose. That thought unsettled her. She had grown used to surviving alone, and now the idea of depending on someone made her uneasy. Kale returned with a blanket, placing it over her shoulders. "Rest," he commanded softly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will need your strength." "I do not need your protection." Kale tilted his head, gray eyes studying her face. "Perhaps not. But the enemy does not wait for pride." Desk. The fortress itself seemed to pulse with power. Shadows moved along the walls, curling and stretching as if alive. Every corner held secrets, and Celine could feel them, even in her weakened state.
She had heard tales of Kale's home, fortress of stone and shadow where no one could survive without fear or skill.
And now she was inside it, a stranger, dependent on the very prince whose presence both unsettled and intrigued her. The days that followed passed slowly. Celine learned quickly that the fortress was not merely a home, but a stronghold of secrets and strategy. Kale moved through its corridors with quiet precision, observing, planning, always aware. Rest. Celine tried to keep to herself, focusing on recovering her strength and keeping her instincts sharp. But Kale did not leave her alone. But Kyle did not leave her alone. He would appear suddenly in the corners of her vision, or stand silently in the doorway watching as she trained or explored the halls. His presence was heavy, like the weight of the mountains outside, impossible to ignore. "You are stronger than most," he said one evening, his voice echoing in the training hall. Selene had been sparring with a weighted sword, practicing her movements, and paused, breathing hard. Beret shift. "But strength alone will not save you from what waits beyond these walls." Selene lowered her sword, her fur bristling. "And what is that?" "Rival clans, shadows that have lingered longer than memory. And," he added slowly, "a curse that will test us both." Selene froze, frowned. She had heard whispers of a curse surrounding Kale's family, something dark, something that had shaped him into the feared figure he was, and now here he was, speaking of it openly to her. Breaths. She did not know if it was trust or if it was a warning.
"I do not care for curses," she said, but her voice lacked conviction.
Even she could feel the cold presence that seemed to follow Kale wherever he went. Kale's eyes softened, just slightly, the gray turning almost tender.
"You will care if it touches those you wish to protect," he said.
"Even the strongest wolf cannot face all darkness alone."
Celine looked away, uncomfortable. She had survived betrayals, winters, and wolves larger than herself.
Rask. She had learned to rely only on her own strength, And yet something in Kale's presence made her consider that perhaps some battles required trust. That night, Selene could not sleep. She wandered the halls of the fortress, her paws silent on the stone floor. Shadows twisted in the torchlight, and every corner seemed alive with whispers. She paused at a high window, looking down at the forest below, white and silent beneath the moonlight. You should return to your chambers. Kale's voice came from behind her, calm but carrying a weight she could not ignore. Selene turned, fur bristling. "And miss this view," she said, though her voice was quieter than she intended. Kale stepped closer, his shadow falling over her in a way that made her heart race despite herself. "There is more at stake here than views," he said. "More than pride or survival. There are forces gathering beyond the borders, and soon you will see what I mean." Selene's eyes narrowed. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because you are part of it," Kale said, his gray eyes locking with her golden ones. "Whether you choose to accept it or not, your fate is tied to mine." Breaths. She wanted to argue, to run, to deny it all. But something in the way he looked at her, steady and unyielding, stopped her. The next days were filled with lessons, each one a test. Kale pushed her to move faster, to think sharper, to trust her instincts. At first, Selene resisted, bristling at the authority, refusing to yield. But gradually, she began to understand that Kale's demands were not cruelty. They were preparation. Preparation for a storm that she could not yet see, but one that was coming. And then the attack came. It began with the sound of horns echoing across the valley, sharp and cold. Selene's ears twitched, and Kale's gray eyes darkened immediately. "They have found us," he said, moving to the battlements. Selene followed, heart racing. From the walls, they could see a rival clan approaching, their numbers hidden beneath heavy cloaks. The snow swirled around them, turning the forest into a white, shifting battlefield. Kale's expression was unreadable, but Selene could sense the tension beneath. He did not shout orders. He did not panic. He was calm, precise, like the storm itself was under his control. And she realized, with a mix of fear and admiration, that she was not witnessing arrogance. She was witnessing power honed by generations of survival and curse. "Stay close," Kale said, voice low, almost a command. "They will test you, and you must not falter."
Selene nodded, instincts alert, every muscle ready.
But she had faced predators in the wild, but this was different. These were human enemies, trained in the arts of war, yet unafraid of what lay beyond the shadows. She did not know why she felt a sudden need to survive, not just for herself, but for Kale. The rival clan reached the fortress's outer walls. Shouts and the clash of metal rang through the night. Selene moved beside Kale, watching his every motion, learning, understanding. He fought not just with strength, but with strategy and precision, anticipating the enemy's moves before they made them. A figure broke through the snowstorm, aiming straight for Kale. Without thinking, Selene leaped forward, her claws slicing through the air, and intercepted the attacker. The movement startled Kale, but his eyes widened just enough for her to see the hint of surprise, and perhaps something more. "You are reckless," Kale said, though his tone carried no anger. "I am not afraid," Selene replied, heart hammering. Kale studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Good," he said, almost to himself. "But caution is not weakness. Remember that." The battle raged, shadows moving like living creatures, snow turning red under the torch's light. Together, Selene and Kale fought, their movements almost synchronized despite their brief acquaintance. And in that chaos, Selene felt a strange bond forming, a connection forged not by choice, but by survival. When the last of the attackers had been driven back into the forest, Celine stood beside Cale, breathing heavily, covered in snow and sweat. Cale's gaze met hers, gray eyes holding an intensity she could not name. "You have done well," he said softly. "But this is only the beginning." Celine looked at him, her golden eyes meeting his gray ones, and for the first time she felt the weight of trust, fragile and new. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she could not face it alone. And somehow, perhaps, she did not want to. The night deepened, and the fortress was silent again, except for the faint howl of a distant wolf. Celine lay in the furs Cale had prepared for her, staring at the ceiling. She could still feel the heat of the battle, the brush of Cale's hand, the strength in his presence, breath. And somewhere deep inside she understood that her journey with him was only beginning. The sun had barely risen over the snow-laden mountains when Celine awoke to an uneasy silence. The fortress, which had felt alive with Cale's shadowy presence the night before, now seemed empty. Only the faint crackle of torches in the distant halls reminded her that someone still watched over her. Celine rose, her silver fur brushing against the furs Cale had provided. Her wrist itched where the faint mark glimmered. The one that had appeared after the battle, but she traced it with her fingers, unsure of its meaning. She had fought for survival for as long as she could remember, but this mark felt different. Bray. It was not pain, nor warning. It was a signal, tying her fate to Cale's in a way she could not yet understand. Cale appeared silently, as he always did, his gray eyes studying her. "You noticed it," he said, his voice low and calm. Celine did not answer immediately. Brash. She flexed her claws, feeling the sharpness of her own strength. "What is it?" she asked finally.
"It is a sign," Cale said, moving closer. "A connection."
One that cannot be ignored. The curse. It recognizes you now. Whether you wish it or not, our paths are linked. Bray. Celine's ears twitched, a flicker of fear crossing her features. She had spent her life alone, trusting no one. And now she was bound, not by choice, but by magic. "I do not want to be bound to anyone," she whispered. Cale's expression softened slightly. "No one chooses their destiny entirely."
"But some bonds save lives, even when they seem a burden."
Brace. Selene turned away, eyes on the snow outside. She had always believed that trust was a weakness. Yet, in the night's battle, she had realized that Cale had saved her not just from enemies, but from isolation itself. For the first time, she felt the weight of relying on someone else, and the strange pull of something more than survival tugged at her heart. The day passed slowly, each moment filled with preparation and quiet tension. Cale took her through the fortress, showing her the rooms and corridors she had never dared explore. Secret passages, hidden armories, and chambers filled with ancient books, all whispered of a history steeped in power and shadow. "You must know," Cale said as they paused before a large, carved door. "Knowledge is as important as strength. And you will need both if you are to survive what comes next." Breaths. "What comes next?" she asked, cautiously.
Cale did not answer immediately.
Instead, he opened the door to reveal a small chamber filled with maps, weapons, and scrolls detailing rival clans, cursed forests, and old prophecies. "The enemy is gathering," he said finally. "And soon they will come, not just for me, but for you as well." Selene stepped inside, the weight of the chamber pressing on her. Her instincts told her to leave, to run, to survive alone as she had always done. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps the pull of destiny. Or perhaps the realization that she no longer wished to face the coming storm alone. As evening fell, Cale stood by the window watching the snow swirl in the cold wind. Selena approached quietly, her movements careful, almost hesitant.
"Why are you so calm?" she asked. "The attack last night."
You should be furious, or at least worried.
Kale's gray eyes turned to her, calm yet unreadable.
Worry does not change the outcome, he said. Preparation does. Preparation. Anger. Anger can blind you to what truly matters. Celine's tail flicked, a sign of unease. And what matters to you? Kale's gaze softened, though only slightly, and Celine caught a glimpse of the man beneath the shadowed prince. Survival, he said simply, and those who fight beside me. The words, so plain yet heavy with meaning, lingered in the air. Brask. Celine felt a strange warmth in her chest, unfamiliar and confusing. She had spent her life shivering in cold forests, feared and hunted, trusting no one. Brand. And yet, here was someone who saw her not just as a warrior but as a companion in the fight, a presence to rely on. The nights grew longer, the snow thicker, and the cold harsher. Preparation. Celine found herself patrolling the fortress with Kale, moving silently through the halls, learning the rhythm of his steps and the weight of his presence. They spoke little, yet the silence itself seemed charged. Every glance, every movement carried unspoken words, words Celine was not yet ready to say aloud. One night, as they trained in the inner courtyard, Kale's shadow fell over her in the moonlight. He demonstrated a movement with his sword, precise and deliberate, and Celine mirrored it, claws gripping the hilt, muscles coiled with readiness.
You are improving, he said quietly.
Faster, sharper, and more aware, etc., breathing hard. I have no choice, she said. If I am to survive, I must adapt. Kale nodded, eyes lingering on her face.
And yet some lessons cannot be learned through strength alone, he said.
Some must be learned through trust.
Celine stiffened. Trust had always been a dangerous word. And yet she felt it stirring inside her, a cautious, hesitant thread, weaving its way through the armor she had built over years of betrayal and loneliness. The following day, Celine received a message. A scout had returned from the forest, carrying news that chilled her blood. Her former pack, the very ones who had abandoned her, was moving, led by a rival clan seeking to claim the north for themselves. They were closer than she had anticipated, and their intent was clear. They would not leave the Silver Wolf. Alive, Celine's golden eyes met Kale's gray ones. They are coming, she said, voice tight with restrained fury. Kale did not flinch. Then we will meet them, he said, his voice steady. But remember, Celine, survival is not just about fighting. It is about understanding, anticipating, and choosing when to strike. Preparation.
The day passed in preparation. Selene patrolled the outer walls, practiced with Kale in the courtyard, and learned the layouts of secret corridors.
Every movement, every lesson brought her closer to understanding the fortress, and closer to understanding Kale.
Ring. He could feel the tension building between them, a subtle but undeniable force, as if the winter itself had taken shape in the spaces where they moved. That night, the snowstorm arrived.
The wind howled like a chorus of ghosts, and Celine could see the shadows of the approaching pack moving like phantoms across the white landscape. Kale stood beside her on the battlements, silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. You are ready, he said softly. Whatever happens, remember that strength alone will not save you.
But together, perhaps we can endure.
Breath. Celine's tail twitched, uncertain. Together, she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. It felt strange, foreign, but not unwelcome. She could not deny the bond that had begun to grow between them, a fragile thread of trust, forged in battle, shared danger, and the quiet moments where silence spoke louder than words. The first attackers reached the walls, their figures dark against the white snow. Celine's heart pounded in her chest as she leaped into action, claws slicing through the cold air, precise and controlled. And for a brief moment Selena understood something she had never allowed herself to feel before. She was not alone, and she was no longer merely surviving. But then, in the chaos, a shadow moved differently, a figure she recognized all too well. Her former pack had arrived, eyes gleaming with betrayal and hunger. They had come not just for her, but to test Kale and claim the North for themselves. Celine's heart clenched. The faces of those who had abandoned her haunted her mind, memories of cold words and turned backs flooding her senses. She hesitated, caught between the instinct to flee and the need to fight, not just for survival, but for justice, for Kale, and perhaps for herself. Kale's voice cut through her hesitation. "Celine!" "Focus!" he shouted, and she snapped back, leaping into the fray with renewed purpose. The battle raged under the storm, a clash of shadow and snow. Selena moved with skill and ferocity, her silver fur a blur in the white storm. Bale was always near, guiding, protecting, challenging her to rise beyond what she thought she could do. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Selena felt the mark on her wrist burn with a strange warmth. The pulse of energy, faint but undeniable, surged through her. It was a reminder, or perhaps a warning, that her connection to Kale's curse was more than symbolic. It was real, powerful, and dangerous. As the night deepened, Celine fought with everything she had, side by side with Kale. And for the first time she realized that she was no longer just a silver wolf abandoned in the cold. She was part of something larger, something that demanded courage, loyalty, and perhaps the beginning of trust. The wind howled over the frozen cliffs, carrying snow in sharp, swirling gusts. The northern kingdom lay silent beneath the white blanket of winter, but Celine felt the tension in the air, like a living thing. She stood at the edge of the fortress walls, golden eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the rival clans were gathering, and she could sense the dark magic that clung to the land like frost on the trees. Kale approached quietly, as he always did, his gray eyes sharp beneath his dark hood. The mark on Celine's wrist pulsed softly, glowing faintly under the pale light of dawn. "They are closer than I expected," Kale said, his voice calm but filled with the weight of command. "And the source of the curse is stirring. Breaths, tonight it will be revealed."
Selene's tail flicked, a signal of unease.
"Then we face it together," she said, trying to steady her voice. The memory of her pack, her betrayal, and the recent battles flared in her mind, but she forced herself to focus. Traitors and betrayal. And now she had Kale by her side. Kale's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Together!" he echoed. Night fell like a shadow across the cliffs. The fortress gates were closed, guards positioned along every wall, but Celine knew the enemy would not come openly. Batters gathered in the forest beyond, and the air grew heavy with magic, dark and unyielding. "You are..." "The curse that has haunted my family. It feeds on fear, on isolation, but it cannot endure trust, loyalty, or courage. We must face it together, and neither of us can falter." Celine's heart beat faster. She had always believed herself alone, abandoned, capable only of survival through solitude. But Kale's presence, steady and unwavering, gave her something she had not known she needed. Hope. A figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, dark silhouette, its eyes glowing with unnatural light. The cursed entity had taken form, feeding on centuries of fear and sorrow. Its voice, cold and hollow, echoed through the forest.
You cannot escape me, Kale!
And you, Silver Wolf. Your loyalty is nothing. You are weak, alone, and soon your bond will shatter, bristled, claws flexing instinctively. I am not weak, she shouted, her voice cutting through the cold wind. I may have been alone once, but I am not alone now. Kale's sword gleamed in the moonlight, shadows swirling around him like living darkness. Remember, Selene, he said quietly, the curse cannot endure trust. Breaths. Together, we are stronger than it knows. The battle began with a sudden surge of shadow and wind. The cursed entity attacked first, sending waves of icy darkness across the cliffs. Selene leaped, twisting in the air, her claws striking at the shadows as Kale deflected blasts of dark magic with precise movements. Together they moved in unison, wolf and prince, strength and strategy, instincts and skill. Selene felt the pulse of the mark on her wrist grow stronger. It was as if the bond it represented was awakening, lending her energy and awareness beyond what she had ever known. Each movement, each strike, was sharper, more instinctive. Breath. She could feel Kale's presence, steady and guiding, yet never overpowering. The cursed entity howled, a sound like frozen glass breaking, and surged toward them. Kale moved to intercept, his sword flashing, but the shadow lashed out at Selene. She dodged, leaped, and struck, her claws tearing through the dark mist. The mark on her wrist flared bright, and for a moment she felt a warmth spreading through her entire body. Selene! Kale called, his voice cutting through the storm. And in that instant the bond between them pulsed visibly, a silver and gray glow connecting them like threads of light. The curse shrieked, recoiling as the bond became stronger. You are not alone, Selene shouted, feeling the courage within her bloom. We face this together. Kael's eyes softened, and for the first time, Selene saw vulnerability behind the gray. Then let us end this, he said. The cursed entity attacked again, and this time they met it head-on. Selene leapt, claws striking as Kale's sword cut through the darkness. Each time they struck, the curse recoiled, weakening with every blow. Selene felt herself becoming stronger, guided by the connection that pulsed through her wrist. She realized that the bond was not a chain, it was a source of power forged by trust, courage, and loyalty. But the entity was not finished. It shifted, taking the form of her former pack, their eyes accusing, jaws snarling. Bray. Selene froze, memories of betrayal flooding back. For a moment fear gripped her. Fear that she would fail. Fear that she would be abandoned again.
Kale's voice broke through her thoughts. Do not falter, Selene.
Breaths. They are illusions. Trust yourself. Trust me. Taking a deep breath, Selene shook off the visions, focusing on the present. Her claws glowed faintly, silver against the darkness, and she lunged forward with renewed determination. The illusions shattered like ice under the sun. The cursed entity screamed, a sound that tore through the night as it faced their united strength. Kale's sword and Selene's claws struck simultaneously, the bond between them pulsing brighter than ever. The shadow writhed, then began to dissolve, its form unraveling in the silver light of their connection. Psst. When the darkness finally lifted, silence fell over the cliffs. Snow drifted gently around them, the first peace they had known in weeks. Selene's chest heaved, her fur damp with sweat and snow. but she felt a strange, calm satisfaction. They had done it. Together, they had faced the curse and survived. Kale lowered his sword, stepping closer. His gray eyes met Celine's golden ones, and for the first time, there was no shadow between them. "It is over," he said softly. "The curse is broken. Your strength, your loyalty, it has saved us both." Celine stared at him, unable to find words. She had survived betrayal, frost, and darkness. She had survived alone. But now, standing beside Kale, she realized she had found something more valuable than survival. Breath. She had found trust. She had found connection. Kale reached out, gently taking her hand. The mark on her wrist pulsed one final time, then faded, leaving only a faint warmth. "Celine," he said, "you are not alone. Never again." Her golden eyes shimmered with emotion.
I
never thought I could feel this," she whispered. "After everything Kale brushed a lock of fur from her face, his expression soft but steady. "You are stronger than you know,"
he said, "and now you have something to fight for. Not just survival, but hope, loyalty, and
perhaps more. Celine swallowed, her heart thumping, but she had always thought of herself as abandoned, a lone wolf wandering the cold forests of the north. But now she realized that she had been forging a bond stronger than any pack could sever. She had found someone who would stand beside her, not as a master or leader, but as a partner, a guide, and perhaps even something more. The snow around them glittered in the pale moonlight. The northern winds had softened, carrying a gentle warmth that had not been felt in years. Celine's former pack, their betrayal finally behind her, had vanished from her mind, replaced by the realization that she was no longer bound by past fears. Kale stepped closer, their hands still touching, the quiet between them heavy with unspoken words. "The world beyond these walls is still dangerous," he said, voice low. "But with trust, loyalty, and courage, we can endure anything."
Selene nodded, her golden eyes meeting his grey ones. "Then let us face it together," she said.
Kale's lips curved into the faintest smile.
"Together," he repeated.
The night stretched on, but the cold no longer bit as sharply. The fortress, the cliffs, the forests, they all seemed softer somehow, warmed by the bond that had been forged in battle, trust, and survival. Celine felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She had endured betrayal, abandonment, and curses, but now she stood stronger than ever. She had survived, yes, but she had also found connection, courage, and the first whispers of hope. She felt like something greater, a silver wolf bound not by fear but by loyalty, trust, and the quiet stirrings of love. And as the first light of dawn painted the snow in gold, she knew that no storm, no shadow, and no curse could ever break the bond she now shared with Kale. Together they turned to face the rising sun, ready to face whatever the world beyond the cliffs held. The northern winds whispered around them, soft and gentle now, carrying with them the promise of a future forged in frost, shadow, and unwavering loyalty. Celine's golden eyes met Kale's gray ones one last time, and in the silent understanding between them, the world seemed brighter. The silver wolf had found her place, and the shadowed prince had found his companion. Together they would endure, and together they would thrive.